Greetings, everyone. This is about understanding nature's purpose in starting all new lives with compound growth, like the Big Bang. It's also natural science, not so much systems science. It's natural science enabled by systems tools and focusing particularly on the study of individual systems that develop by growth, and offering new choices for a future society. To do that, we focus on the milestones of new lives, the sequence of changes in growth stage development as a useful guide and source of leverage points. The general issues are that humanity is still in its long Big Bang explosion of new technologies, services, complexity, and disruptions that started with the perfection of the steam engine in 1780. But how are we handling it? It used to be that growth would produce wealth sufficient to completely compensate for the side effects of growth, but now the tables are completely turned. Growth produces new side effects great in excess of our wealth for responding to them. And so what is compound growth for anyway? Might we learn from nature's other kinds of Big Bang development processes and what becomes of them? Where would we look for examples? Or are they hidden in plain sight? Some basic natural systems issues. You might not know growth is nature's main system building process, with its feedback loops all internalized, hidden from view. But that's the case. It's a capture and incorporation process, growth is. Like learning, that continually changes the whole system, so it's not reversible. That's the case for any growth system. It starts as a whole and it develops as a whole, which is one of its greatest fascinations too, of course. The nonlinear dynamics are what correspond to the internal stages of development, the compound growth and asymptotic growth, and also predict what's next. But it's like an assembly line of nonlinear dynamics. The start and end of accelerating and then decelerating development are the main milestones. And complex systems created by growth are what new lives, a very general term, refers to as new forms of organization that have lives of their own. And here's the principal example, of course, the Anthropocene, its great acceleration, which began approximately 1780 upon James Watt's perfection of the rotary steam engine. And we set off on a tear, 140 years of 1.48% per year compound growth of atmospheric CO2, corresponding to the combination of combustion products and soil disturbance and other natural causes of CO2. So this is my favorite metric, the atmospheric CO2 measure, which really is the cause of climate change and has these very clear signatures of our policy of maximizing compound growth as a civilization. After World War II, the compound growth rate jumped to 2% per year, and is still there despite the COVID. So we build life around rearranging nature in our lives at ever faster accelerating rates. But what for? Could it be for life instead of destruction? So does an equation that fits a growth system growth process describe the growth process? Well, no, it's just an equation. It hardly describes what's going on at all. Here's the great pictures of the great acceleration of a farmhand chick starting 10 days before the egg is laid, so off the chart here, and then 21 days after. It grows by an explosive big bang at first, and then as the embryo develops, it starts to slow down and slow down and slow down, maturing to a point where it's going to be strong enough to survive in the nest. And then, of course, in the nest, growth slows further as the work becomes learning about how to live in the world. But it's a very purposeful great acceleration, the birth process, and it creates things like tidal zone ecologies with all these strange-looking critters that fit together. The niches fit together. Each grows to occupy its territory in the overall environment. But that also works for the world ecosystem zones, that each one grows to fit a niche, as well as for cities, where each one grows to fit its niche and takes on the shape determined by the growth of its parts. Also, the interrelationships of the skulls of mammals that Darcy Thompson discovered, along with many other interesting things, as well as hurricanes that grow to fit their growth process. The cold air going down the eye and the hot air going up in the clouds, in the spiral arms of the clouds. And all of these, I believe it's accurate to say, are controlled by intercellular signaling pathways, where basically collective organization. I think it's very hard to find the words for what kind of organization life uses. I'll show you about as much as I could be specific about. There is, though, a common cause for growth being at the center of organizational development, is that energy conservation requires gradual beginnings and endings to avoid infinite rates of change. That the conservation of energy says energy is not destroyed or created, it only is transferred. But in order to transfer, it has to build up, because if it were to change instantaneously, it would violate the energy conservation laws. And this is the map of a proof of that, where the three conservation laws, conservation of energy, momentum, and reaction forces, are related as integral and derivative of each other, and then projecting that into an infinite series of conservation laws gives me something to then reintegrate and produces the form of an exponential curve. So along with the reasoning behind it, that says that all change requires an S-curve growth process, affirmed, of course, by observation of the ubiquity of growth curves for beginnings and ends everywhere we look. And if you want to see the discussion, the proof and the discussion, it's at the link at the bottom of the screen. You can take a screen capture. But this is a proof that's fairly simple mathematics, but I've so far been unable to communicate the purpose of it to people able to validate it. So At the moment, it's an unvalidated theory that seems to correspond very closely to the observation of the nature of change in the universe. So to make this new science, it needs to have a new general story. It needs to be based on data and observation and be open to elaboration. A symbolic S-curve with milestones AA, BB, CC, where each lowercase letter is an event and each uppercase letter is a period of development. The explosion period is the first one, then the maturation period is the second one, and then the engagement in the world is the third, going from compound growth to asymptotic growth to homeostatic growth of enterprise. Also beginning, middle, and end, individuation, maturation, engagement, divergence, convergence, homeostasis. So it's one general story for all individual new lives, no matter how widely varied. A natural science story of continuity of change and continuity of changing organization for systems. Now, each life then is the center of its own universe as we experience our lives, and as seems rational to consider other individual lives that we're studying, that the world to them looks like they're the center of the universe. For plants, animals, ecosystems, weather systems, civilizations, economies, communities, businesses, cultures, societies, social groups, personal relationships, work habits, home office, and artistic projects, etc. AABBCC. Okay, but wait, why mix human designs with natural designs? It appears that we copied our method of system design from nature using the same three-part story of innovation, then maturation, then release, having the same milestones as natural growth for an office project. For example, you start with a brainstorm and it gets accepted and refined, and then implemented and made ready to be released into the world and then operated in its mature state. For the communities, businesses, cultures, societies, social groups that we organize and develop around us. So growth is also a hero's journey, a thread of 6 suspense-filled complex stories, the same ABC sequence, but with the 6 parts, each having a story that goes with it as to how the parts are fitting together, how they're interacting with the environment, how they're changing, how they're evolving, but the basic structure is 3 pairs of events and the processes they start. Positive feedback, positive, negative feedback, and then homeostasis. Egg environment, nest environment, world environment. Self-organizing intercellular signaling pathway formation. So here's a drawing of that intercellular pathway formation. Perhaps this is a more familiar map of an environment and living systems. It's the world that the climax stage of growth of new lives emerges into, a complex natural world, and particularly, mostly, of intermittent relationships. That almost everything in nature is intermittent. We don't have any absolutely continuous connections, and we make them continuous through our behavior. So somehow the system design within natural systems is a way of making discontinuity continuous. Um, but it's what we call home, and we recognize it, and we recognize the experience of self-organizing our intercellular signaling pathways. So here's the life stages of plants. It starts with a seed in the fertilized plant, where you first see the shape of the seedling in the seed before it's shed by the plant. So that's the first big bang occurs in the plant, and then another big bang occurs when it germinates and sprouts. And then there's a long, slow maturation process, and the maturation process probably shorter than its adult period, but then there's the entropy period, when it disassembles or breaks down. The syntropy period is the energy concentrating period, which includes all the periods of new lives, the development, maturation, and engagement, are all syntropy periods of concentrating energy, and then ending with an entropy period. And the same thing applies to the life stages of people, that in the first couple trimesters, I think, and maybe a little more, the multiplication is furiously more than once a week, going from one cell to a trillion by the time the pregnancy is just barely visible. And then in the final period, where it becomes very visible, the growth is slowing in the womb, to then have an accelerating period in early childhood, and then slowing for 18 years of youth, and then for 1100 months of adulthood before disengagement and decline. And so the proportionality is that a very short, very fast explosion, then a slowing growth period that's longer, and a much longer mature life period. And it's more or less the same thing applies to the life stages of a new house. You have two growth cycles, one in the designer's kitchen or the architect's office, the egg stage, where you go from a bright idea to a possibility, to then a thoroughly refined plan that's handed off to the builder, and that it assembles the materials and makes arranges his people to coordinate to first start the build up of the construction process, and then finish it, and then the house is ready for occupation and a long life of diverse experience of the new owner. So here's the symbolic diagram, the simple form. Egg, nest, world is the three main stages, each having a beginning, a germ, a turn forward, where attention stops being building up from the past to building up toward the future, and then a release to engagement, individuation, maturation, engagement, the synergy period of concentrating energies. And this is the complete diagram with, that's the figure 5 in the paper, and the origin environment, the destination environment, and the parts in between. Also, the first derivative of development, this arc of the story, where the arc of the growth story, anyway, develops and subsides, that has also, these are both S curves on either side of that. So there's another layer of complexity there. And then one of the most interesting and I think important features that the growth, the feedback reference line, the positive feedback reference baseline is the floor, and the negative feedback reference line is the ceiling. So the turn forward, there's a baseline inversion where the natural process is to multiply furiously until there's a flip of the reference line to the ceiling. And I have worked on this some. I see it happen all the time. I don't know how to describe how it happens exactly, except in terms of human terms of the things that we're familiar with. Like when you're doing an office project, you go through the creative period where time is of no matter, and then you realize, oh no, we have to finish this, and that's the turn forward where you get to the point where you have a kind of gut feeling that we are not going to be able to finish this unless we get to it right away. So that's a flip from multiplying freely to being more and more constrained by the need to complete the design. And you can do that egg nest world model for a family dinner, for a vacation, or an office project. You start with a vision of what to do that germinates, no commitments at first, planning for and assembling the parts, then the turn forward to refining and putting the plan in motion, getting it fully detailed and cleaning up passing it on to others, and then the release that occurs at that point as it's passed on, for it to take on its life either on the dining room table or in the vacation resort, or where you get the reward for all that creativity and work in inventing and perfecting a design. So, how might this kind of language for new lives be used? It could be used for discussing the Anthropocene growth crisis, exposing the responsibility of wealth for the increasing disruption of the earth and harm to our economic capitals. And could be used to help unify a worldwide change of heart that's already underway but needs a focal point, and really needs a focal point. It needs that nucleus of germination to become a global consensus that we have to act, because we really have to act. And lots of people see that. Helping people see and anticipate the milestones of their own lives is another application. Learning to read growth changes more accurately at home or in the office, in the environment, in the news, be able to better understand what the news is about, seeing the turning points of growth processes, helping to enable the global transformation communities. There are huge numbers of communities organized for global transformation right now, and they need a way to connect and something to connect around. And this could help, along with other things. I know this is a personal vision, but it is also founded on the conservation of energy. So I know it has strength in the core and is worth pursuing, and could also help disparate cultures, some of them transformation communities, some of them cultures like China, which is totally obsessed with capitalism now, and to have a common language with others. And it's also important to use other transformation models. There's the long familiar struggle and breakthrough. It's just shown here as a compressed egg nest world model, where there's seemingly nothing happening and then lots of happening. The breakout of hip hop as a culture in New York City wandered around the neighborhoods in New York City for 20 years before it got any press, and then suddenly had huge amount of economic and cultural awareness success, and in the early 90s. Then there's the Three Horizons framework, which is one horizon is to break down the old system that you need to replace, another for building the new system that needs to become, and then the transformation, they're in between transformation efforts, and so any global transformation, I think, needs to be thought through for all these different kinds of models. This third model is Kate Raworth's donut economics of seeing a system as having built around its services, and responding to its environment, and then the whole panarchy of Holling and I forgot the other name, is a very widely understood idea. It's more complex than the egg nest world or natural growth model. It assumes that stabilization is decay, which I have a problem with, but lots of people are very familiar with it and use it. So it's a metaphor that is useful because people are using it. So here's an illustration of three types of growth systems, three types of new lives. Two are very short-lived. The first is something like a match that flares but doesn't catch on. So this is a growth system that learns how to multiply its use of its startup resource, but then just uses it up and dies up. Nothing happens. And then the purple line is a growth system that both uses up its starting resource and finds other resources to continue multiplying without limit until it disorganizes. as some startup businesses get too much business, for example, and they have to make decisions which turn out to be financially disastrous because they don't know what they're doing and can't plan, and collapses. And then there's the business that does it more smoothly. It gets to a point where it realizes that it needs to self-limit, and then does so smoothly and carries on for a long time, like the typical uh, family-owned business that anchors small towns and big cities both, that develop and produce a good income, and at the point when starting with investing their profits, every penny of profits in growing the business, and then spending the profits once it's grown and for family and community needs, and as it becomes what is unfavorably called a cash cow. But this is what I think is the future of both the kinds of businesses that I and Shan are talking about taking over. Is the model is the anchor family business that grows in order to have money for a good life and live in a good community. So okay, here's another. These are delays in turning forward for the start of responding to the sustainable limit on the growth curve. S1 and S2 are earlier than necessary, but they, even when you go on to S3, where you have a sudden bump in the curve, or a reversal in the curve, you end up near the sustainable limit, no matter which choice you make. But everybody understands that the more delay of something inevitable, the more disruptive the turn. And so this is an argument to understand the situation in our world as something that we're making our future lives more disrupted by delaying response. So here's our real world. These are the growth curves, or a set of growth curves for the world economy. GDP growth, this is the Great Recession, is this little bump here. And the meat, food, energy, CO2, parts per million in the atmosphere, and emissions and efficiency, all are parallel growth curves, which says the system, the world economy, works as a whole and looks like it has a single driving force, and that as a whole system driving force that pulls all the parts along at a constant proportional rates of change. And of course, it's a physical system, and it's pushing and pulling on things, pushing and pulling on nature, pushing and pulling on society, and escalating push comes to shove with a jerk of change. The jerk is a word for the third derivative. That's what the physicists call the third derivative. First derivative being the rate of change, second derivative acceleration, third derivative jerk. So we have an exponential jerk as making more and more drastic change for us. So to scope out a system, whoops, there's this thing that gets in the way of my reading. Set up professional studio. Oh, there's an X. Oh, what the? Scoping a system survival plan. First, you notice that there's inequity, and then you ask why. And it turns out to be because in commerce, you have a circle for money, that money and goods exchange. There's money, there's profit, but then the profit is spent. Goods and labor going in one direction, money in the other. And this is a stable system. And it could grow as innovations are made, but it's not driven to grow as is the result of investors saving profit to put into investment, to take more profit, to put more investment in. That produces what I call a carrot and stick driver of finance. And the way it works is that growing investment in business makes business feel like they're getting ahead of the game, but then growing profits into investment puts money into competition. So both the competition in the system and the struggle in the system and the wealth in the system increase at the same time as this feedback loop escalates exponentially, and it has no upper bound at the moment. It's a driver that is maximizing the pressure it can put on human and nature to perform for maximizing the driver. And so this is something that is actually taboo, I believe, to discuss. I found in 4 years working with UN organizations that it just absolutely couldn't be discussed. That they all rely on the institutions that the OECD, for example, that are at the heart of the organizing the financial system to maximize the compound growth rate of the economy. And every proposal is passed by financial advisors before it's voted on, and proposals for divesting enough to reduce the pressure on society and nature are removed from the vote before they're presented. That was my experience several times. But it's got to happen. So here's the art and science of the impossible. Here we have something, balancing divestment really has to happen. Nature's going to push us to it, either by collapsing the money pile, because it's not made of gold, actually. It's made of relationships, of promises. So either it collapses the money pile, or we realize that it's going to do that, and we balance the system and stabilize at a healthy level, rather than stabilize at a much lower unhealthy level. But getting people to even think that way is at the moment sort of a closed door. It's complicated system science, and it's taboo in government and institutions. Anyway, other ways that other signs of it happening already, though, there are lots of wealthy donors diverting more and more investments into nonprofits, or making philanthropy donations. People are really hungry for new information and choices on the future. That the world senses there's something wrong, and there's tremendous effort everywhere of people trying to find new direction for their lives, because our lives are not working out very well at the moment, and of course they're sensing the right thing because these forces are not getting not getting the relief they need. I guess a lot of people also in this conference, there are a lot of proposals that are based on a promise or expectation that we have. There are ways to respond to the global struggle for survival. The barriers I've already mentioned, that the carrot and stick that drives disruptive growth is taboo to, and a little tricky, and our divided cultures are not well informed. There are lots of brilliant individual people making yeoman efforts, but generally speaking, as foreign languages relative to each other's efforts. So we're in a pickle. So what the world might understand, though, is that the Earth needs a new life. I think an awful lot of people could understand that. A carrot and stick growth is exhausting and dangerous. If you don't have to explain it, you just say it. I think a lot of people would get that. And we need a well-informed planetary sense of community. Lots of people would get that. How to achieve that? That's the problem. So here's an example of the kind of growth curves that I study using the egg nest world model. That you have an egg period where there's no visible growth in refugees, and then suddenly there's a growth and a subsidence, and then more growth, and distributed fairly widely, the limits to growth study in 72 and the review of it in 2007, I think, both predicted migration of stateless populations, but for climate change and other environmental crises. And these, if you look at them, these seem to be social political crises of states being disturbed and people fleeing catastrophe, social political catastrophe. So this is something that would be good to get our teeth into as a test example. See if we can figure out what is it that is causing this escalation of national instability. Here's a map of where it occurs, and I'm not sure that there seem to be three centers. There's the Middle East, and there's the Sub-Saharan and Venezuela, where you have a mad dictator. So there's a lot to chew on there, but I think there's lots of other examples. I have a set of slides after this that we could go to for further discussion. But anyway, the research concludes we are destroying the Earth. Could you kindly rephrase that in an equivocal, inaccurate, vague, self-serving, and roundabout terms we can understand, we can all understand? So culturally, we need a sunrise, and let's talk about it.
Absolutely, Jesse. Wonderful. As I listened to you, I began to realize we really do need to talk about it. I will be working to try to set up some kind of mechanism where we can come together. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know what you guys might think about this, but something like once a month at least that we can continue. So it would be essentially extending this thread out, keeping it going, talking about it, and trying to understand each other's language and trying to figure out what we can do in advancing our systems knowledge and so forth. Thank you, Jesse. That was just wonderful.
Thank you so much.